Billionaire catches black driver dancing with his paralyzed daughter. What happened next shocked everyone. Stop that immediately. Richard Blackwood's voice echoed through the mansion like thunder. He stood at the entrance to the living room, his fists clenched, watching a scene that made his blood boil instantly. His 8-year-old daughter Sophia was in her wheelchair in the center of the room, smiling for the first time in months. Next to her, Andre Silva, the driver he had hired just 3 weeks ago, danced gently to Brazilian music playing on his cell phone. The 32-year-old man held the girl's hand delicately, spinning slowly around the chair while she clapped her hands with a joy Richard hadn't seen since the accident. "What the hell do you think you're doing with my daughter?" Richard lunged toward Andre, who immediately stopped dancing and let go of Sophia's hand. The girl's smile vanished instantly, replaced by an expression of confusion and fear. Andre remained calm, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "Mr. Blackwood, I can explain." Richard interrupted, his voice laden with indignation. "You were hired to drive, not to do whatever this is." He gestured furiously toward the cell phone that was still playing music. "Turn that thing off now." Sophia began to cry silently, and Andre quickly grabbed the phone to pause the music. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard looked at his daughter, then at Andre, and something in his chest tightened in a way he couldn't name. "Daddy, please," Sophia whispered, her voice small and broken. "Andre was just teaching me to dance like the other kids." "You can't dance," Richard exploded, the words coming out before he could control them. "You're in a wheelchair, Sophia. The sooner you accept that, the better." Andre's face twitched slightly, but he remained silent. There was something in his eyes, not anger, not fear, but a deep understanding that Richard couldn't quite place. It was as if the driver knew exactly the kind of pain that made him react that way. "Mr. Blackwood," Andre said calmly, his voice carrying a soft accent that Richard had never noticed before. "Can I speak with you privately?" "There's nothing to discuss," Richard replied curtly. "Get your things, you're fired." Andre nodded slowly, but before turning to leave, he looked at Sophia one last time. "Remember what we talked about with butterflies? Little one, some fly differently. But they still fly." As Andre walked toward the door, Richard noticed something that made him uneasy. The man didn't seem surprised or desperate, as he would have expected from someone who had just lost his job. There was a serenity in his movements, as if he knew something Richard didn't. Sophia continued crying, and Richard knelt beside her chair trying to comfort her. But his words sounded empty even to his own ears. "Why did you send him away?" Sophia asked between sobs. "He made me feel normal again." Richard didn't know how to respond. For 6 months since the accident that left Sophia paralyzed from the waist down, he had hired the best physical therapists, psychologists and specialists money could buy. None of them had been able to elicit a genuine smile from his daughter until Andre showed up. As he watched Sophia wipe her tears with the back of her hand, Richard wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. There was something about that driver that didn't fit, something that set off alarm bells in his analytical mind, but not the kind he would have expected. If this story of prejudice and unexpected discoveries is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Richard was about to discover about Andre would change not only his perspective on the driver, but on himself in a way he never thought possible. 3 days had passed since the dismissal, and the Blackwood mansion seemed to have returned to its quiet, cold routine. Richard threw himself into his work, convincing himself that he had made the right decision. After all, he couldn't allow strangers to take advantage of his daughter's vulnerability. But Sophia was not cooperating with his plan for normality. The girl refused to leave her room, pushed away her meals, and cried whenever she heard the sound of cars in the driveway, hoping it was Andre returning. The physical therapists hired by Richard reported total resistance. She simply refused to participate in any activity. "Daddy, why isn't Andre coming back?" Sophia asked for the 10th time that morning, her tears leaving stains on her pillowcase. "We've already talked about this, sweetheart." "He wasn't right for the job here," Richard replied, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. The meeting with Japanese investors couldn't be postponed, even with the drama at home. "But he understood me," Sophia murmured, turning her face to the wall. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Andre Silva was sitting at his small kitchen table, calmly typing on a laptop that definitely didn't match the modest apartment where he lived. The screen showed a series of emails in English, French, and Portuguese, correspondence that a simple driver should never be able to maintain. His phone rang. "Dr. Silva." The voice on the other end spoke in French. "The university would like to confirm your availability for the lecture on neuroplasticity next week." "I need to postpone it for a few days," Andre replied in the same language, his eyes never leaving the photo he had discreetly taken of Sophia during one of her dance classes. "I have a special case that requires attention." Richard had never bothered to properly investigate Andre Silva's background. Had he done so, he would have discovered that the man he had hired as his driver had a PhD in neuroscience from the Sorbonne, specialized in music and movement therapy for children with neurological trauma, and had abandoned a promising academic career in Paris after personal tragedy. But there was something else. Something that even the most thorough investigation would not reveal. Andre had known the Blackwood family for much longer than Richard had imagined. As Richard prepared for another day of trying to ignore his daughter's sobs, his personal assistant, James, entered the office with a worried expression. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to report something strange," James said, consulting his tablet. "The driver you fired, he didn't try to contest the dismissal. He didn't ask for references. He didn't seem desperate at all." Richard frowned. In fact, Andre's calm reaction had bothered him from the start. "So what? Maybe he already had another job lined up. It's just that I did some checking, sir. I found out that he has advanced academic training. He speaks 4 languages," and James hesitated. "There are records of him working with special needs children in European hospitals." Richard's stomach tightened slightly. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Because you didn't ask for a full background check? You said you just needed someone to drive." Richard vaguely remembered the job interview. Andre had been recommended by the employment agency as highly qualified and experienced with families. He had assumed that referred only to experience as a driver. That afternoon, Richard returned home early and found Sophia exactly as he had left her. Motionless on the bed, staring out the window, but this time, she was whispering something. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" he asked, approaching her. "The butterflies," Sophia replied without turning around. "Andre taught me that some fly differently, but they still fly like me." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. Those were the last words Andre had said to Sophia before leaving, later, after Sophia had fallen asleep. Richard found himself walking to the garage where he used to find Andre cleaning the car and humming softly. The space was now empty and silent, but something caught his attention. On the seat of the car, Andre had left a small leather folder. Richard opened it, expecting to find personal documents. Instead, he found medical articles on infantile paralysis, music therapy techniques, and a series of handwritten notes on the SPK Sophia Blackwood's initials. The notes were detailed, professional, and revealed a knowledge of Sophia's condition that went far beyond what any driver should possess. There were exercise diagrams, adapted musical progressions, and a treatment plan that stretched out over months. At the bottom of the folder, Richard found a faded photograph. A young man in a white coat standing next to a blonde woman in a hospital bed, both smiling at the camera. The woman had the same blue eyes as Sophia. It was his wife, Elena, the woman who had died in the accident that left Sophia paralyzed. The photo was dated 6 years ago in a hospital in Paris. On the back, a note in French, "Dr. Andre Silva, pediatric neurological trauma specialist, treatment of Elena Blackwood." Richard dropped the photo, his hands shaking. Andre wasn't just a skilled driver who had happened to appear in his life. He had known Elena, he had treated his wife, and now, 6 years later, he had mysteriously turned up to work in his house just when Sophia needed help the most. Every new humiliation Richard had inflicted on Andre, every harsh word, every look of contempt, now took on a completely different weight. The man he had fired so cruelly was not an opportunist trying to take advantage of a vulnerable child. He was possibly the only person in the world who really knew how to help Sophia. And Richard had just sent him away, the next morning. Richard couldn't concentrate on any of his meetings. The photo of Elena with Andre hammered in his mind like an unanswered question. How was it possible that fate had brought his wife's doctor to work as a driver in his home, just when Sophia needed him most? It couldn't be a coincidence. Richard canceled all his appointments and instructed James to hire a private investigation agency immediately. "I want everything on Andre Silva, every document, every job, every breath he's taken in the last 15 years. Sir, may I ask why this is so urgent?" James asked, adjusting his glasses nervously. "I found out that our former driver is not who we thought he was," Richard replied, still holding the photo. "And I need to know exactly who I've been dealing with." Meanwhile, Sophia had taken a turn for the worse. She refused to eat, wouldn't talk to anyone, and had developed a low fever that the doctors couldn't explain. The physical therapist reported that the girl had simply closed her eyes during the entire session, as if she had given up completely. "It's as if she's lost the will to live," murmured Dr. Peterson, the family pediatrician, after examining Sophia. "Sometimes children who have suffered trauma develop very specific emotional attachments when those connections are abruptly severed." "Are you suggesting that my daughter is sick because I fired a driver?" Richard interrupted, his voice heavy with disbelief and irritation. I'm suggesting that you may have underestimated the importance of this person in her recovery. That afternoon, the agency's report arrived via encrypted email. Richard locked himself in his office and began to read, his certainties crumbling page by page. Andre Silva had graduated from the University of Sao Paulo with a degree in medicine, specialized in pediatric neurology in France, and for 6 years had worked at the Necron-Fawn Malades Hospital in Paris, the same hospital where Elena had been treated during a research stint. But there was more, much more. Andre had lost his own daughter in a car accident 3 years ago. Luna Silva, aged 5, had died in circumstances similar to those that left Sofia paralyzed. After the tragedy, Andre abandoned traditional medicine and began developing unconventional techniques of therapy through music and movement for traumatized children. The report included scientific articles published by Andre, citations in international medical journals, and something that made Richard's blood run cold. An interview he had given to a French newspaper 2 years earlier, in which Andre mentioned his intention to find other children like Luna and offer them a second chance to smile. Richard picked up the phone and dialed Andre's number. The phone rang several times before a calm voice answered. "I know you found out who I am," Andre said without even waiting for a greeting. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" Richard asked, his voice betraying a mixture of anger and confusion. "Because men like you don't hire ex-doctors to drive cars? You hire chauffeurs? And Sofia needed someone who could be around her without raising suspicion or expectations." "Suspicions? What kind of game are you playing with my family?" Andre sighed deeply on the other end of the line. "Mr. Blackwood, your wife Elena came to me 6 months before the accident. She was researching alternative treatments for infantile paralysis because doctors had already diagnosed a problem during her pregnancy that could affect Sofia in the future." Richard felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. "That's impossible. Sofia was born perfectly healthy. She was, but Elena knew there was a genetic risk. She was preparing a preventive treatment plan in case something happened. She asked me to promise that if Sofia ever needed it, I would do everything in my power to help her." Andre's words echoed in the silent office like a confession that rewrote the entire history Richard thought he knew. Elena had kept a medical secret from him. She had prepared for a tragedy that had not yet happened. "You're lying," Richard muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's in her will, Mr. Blackwood. In the part your lawyers probably classified as delusions of a worried pregnant woman, Elena left specific instructions on how Sofia should be treated in the event of paralysis." Richard quickly opened the digital files of Elena's will on his computer. There on page 17, a section he had completely overlooked. "In the event of neurological trauma or paralysis involving our daughter Sofia, I recommend contacting Dr. Andre Silva, a specialist in unconventional therapy. His methods may seem unorthodox, but they work where traditional medicine fails." "My God," Richard whispered, dropping the phone. James appeared at the door at that moment, carrying a folder of documents. "Sir, there's something you need to see. I found records of payments your wife made to a clinic in Paris. Monthly payments that continued to be automatically debited from a joint account until last month." Richard took the documents with trembling hands. Elena had been paying for a children's rehabilitation clinic all these years. A clinic where Andre worked as a consultant. "He's been watching us," Richard muttered, "waiting." "Not watching, sir," James corrected gently. "Waiting to be needed." At that moment, Richard realized the extent of his arrogance. He had humiliatingly fired the only man in the world his wife had specifically chosen to take care of Sofia. He had treated as an opportunist the doctor who had abandoned a brilliant career to fulfill a promise made to a dead woman. Worse, he had done so in front of Sofia, shattering the only genuine connection the girl had formed since the accident. Richard called Andre again. "I need you to come back." "That's not how it works," Andre replied calmly. "I'm not an employee you can fire and rehire at your convenience. I'm a doctor who made a promise. Then what do you want from me? I want you to stop trying to control your daughter's healing and start participating in it. I want you to admit that you don't know what's best for Sofia. And I want you to apologize not to me but to her." Richard swallowed his pride like a bitter pill. "And if I do that, then maybe Sofia still has a chance at happiness." As Richard processed the magnitude of his mistakes, a notification popped up on his phone. A text message from an unknown number. "Sofia asked me to send this to you." It was a 3-minute video. In the video, Sofia appeared sitting in her wheelchair in what looked like a doctor's office, smiling as she moved her arms in sync with soft music. Her legs, though immobile, swayed slightly to the rhythm. Andre appeared briefly in the corner of the screen, guiding her movements with infinite patience. The message accompanying the video was devastating in its simplicity. "She recorded this last week when she still believed that you loved her more than your own pride. Richard realized at that moment that he had lost much more than an employee. He had lost his own daughter's trust, and now, for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he could ever regain what he had destroyed with his arrogance and prejudice. But as he watched the video for the 5th time in a row, a different determination began to grow in his chest. Not the determination to control, but the humility to learn, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the father Sophia deserved to have across town. Andre hung up the phone and looked at the framed photo on his desk. Luna, his daughter, smiling in a rocking chair shortly before the accident. "One more, my little one," he whispered. "We'll save one more." Richard drove to Andre's apartment unannounced. The investigation report folded in his trembling hand. He found him sitting on the balcony reading a book in French as if he had been expecting this visit. "You planned all of this," Richard said bluntly, climbing the steps leading up to the small apartment. From day one, Andre calmly closed the book and gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood. It's time we talked like two men who love the same child." "No!" Richard exploded. "You lied about who you were. You manipulated my family, you used my wife's memory to fulfill a promise I made to her." Andre interrupted, his voice firm. "A promise you never knew she asked me to make." Richard threw the report on the table between them. "I know everything about Luna, your daughter, about how you abandoned medicine after she died, about how you've been using other children to try to make up for your own loss." Andre's face twitched slightly, but he didn't deny it. "You're right about one thing. Every child I help brings Luna back for a few moments. But if you think that diminishes my love for Sophia, you're very much mistaken. How dare you?" Richard began. But Andre interrupted him again. "Your wife came to me because she knew you would never accept unconventional methods. Elena knew your need to control everything, to have scientific answers to emotional problems. She asked me to promise that if anything happened to Sophia, I would find a way to be there, even if it meant lying about who I really was." Andre picked up a yellowed letter from the table. "Elena wrote this for you, but she asked me to give it to you only when the time came." Richard immediately recognized his wife's handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened the letter and read aloud. "Richard, if Andre is giving you this letter, it means that our daughter needs him and you are fighting it. Stop trying to fix Sophia and start loving her for who she is. Let Andre help her. He lost his own daughter, but he can save ours." Tears began to roll down Richard's cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it. You needed to see Sophia smile again first to understand that not everything can be controlled or bought." At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Carla, the nurse, and her voice was filled with panic. "Mr. Blackwood, you need to come home immediately. Sophia, she's out of bed. She's trying to walk on her own and refuses to stop until Andre returns." Richard felt his world collapse for the second time that month. "I'm going home," he said to Andre. "You're coming with me, not as your employee." Andre replied firmly, "As your daughter's doctor, as the man your wife chose to take care of her, and as someone who will no longer accept being treated as inferior for trying to save his family." On the way back, Richard finally asked the question that had been hammering in his head. "What do you really want from me?" "I want you to stop seeing my color before you see my competence. I want you to stop thinking that because I'm Brazilian and I was driving your car, I can't be qualified to take care of your daughter. And I want you to admit that you spent 6 months paying the best specialists in the world, but you fired the only one who really worked because he didn't look like what you expected a doctor to look like." Andre's words cut deeper than any investigation report. Richard realized that he had judged Andre not only as an employee, but had carried all the prejudices he didn't even know he had. When they arrived at the mansion, they found Sophia in the hallway leaning on her wheelchair, but with her feet on the floor trying to take small steps. Tears streamed down her face. But she didn't stop Sophia. Richard ran toward her, but she raised her hand. "No, Daddy, I have to show Andre that I did it. I have to show him that I didn't give up." Andre approached slowly and knelt down to the girl's height. "I always knew you could do it, little butterfly. But you don't have to hurt yourself to prove it to me. Will you come back?" Sophia asked, her voice small and full of hope. Andre looked at Richard, who finally understood that this wasn't about hiring an employee. It was about accepting help. It was about swallowing his pride. It was about admitting that he had judged an extraordinary man by his most superficial characteristics. "Andre," Richard said, his voice breaking, "I don't know how to apologize for what I did. I don't know how to make up for my prejudice, my arrogance, but if there's still a chance, I'd like you to come back, not as a driver, as the doctor my wife chose, as the person who made my daughter smile again." Andre smiled for the first time since he had been fired. "Only if you promise me one thing, anything. The next time I teach Sophia to dance, you'll dance with her too. Because she needs her father, not just her doctor. And there, In the hallway of that mansion that had been cold and silent for so long, the most beautiful of creations began, that of a family learning that love knows no prejudice, and that sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply accepting help from those who are willing to offer it, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. 2 years later, the Blackwood mansion had been completely transformed. The Different Butterflies Project served dozens of children with disabilities. Created through a partnership between Richard Blackwood and Dr. Andre Silva, Sophia, now 10 years old, walked with crutches and danced regularly. Her laughter echoed through the halls of the house that had been transformed into a center of hope. "Dad, today we're going to teach the new girl how to dance," Sophia announced as she entered the office. "She's afraid, but I'll show her that dancing in a chair is beautiful too," Richard smiled, remembering when he thought it was impossible for someone in a wheelchair to dance. Andre had become much more than a doctor. He was the brother Richard never knew he needed. During meetings with investors, Richard made a point of telling the truth. "I almost destroyed my daughter's only chance at happiness because I judged an extraordinary doctor by the color of his skin. My prejudice almost cost Sophia her happiness." The graduation ceremony for the first class took place in the main hall. 23 children had completed the program. Sophia took the stage with her crutches and danced a routine she had choreographed herself. "2 years ago, I thought I would never be happy," she said into the microphone. "Today, I know that being different doesn't mean you're less special. It means you fly in your own unique way." Andre watched, moved, remembering his first words to Sophia. Some butterflies fly differently, but they still fly. Richard had lost friends from his elite circle who did not accept his partnership with a black man, but he gained a real family and a purpose in life. "I learned that prejudice is not just injustice against others. It's a prison we build for ourselves," he said in a national interview. "When I finally saw Andre for who he really was, I didn't just save my daughter, I saved myself." The project served 300 families a year. Andre published his methodology free of charge for doctors worldwide. Richard discovered that building lives was more rewarding than building fortunes. The mansion that had been a silent tomb now pulsed with music and hope. Richard proved that the best revenge against prejudice is to turn it into bridges to a better world. If this story has shown you how our judgments can blind us to miracles right in front of us, subscribe to the channel for more stories.